Good morning, everyone. While everyone else is talking politics this morning, we're going to talk about church stuff because that's what this channel's for mostly. So, a lot of people will inevitably see this and comment, why do we care what a celebrity thinks? Well, let's talk about that for just a bit here. Besides the fact that it's a sign of how bad our culture is right now, the state that we're in, and have been for quite some time, that when as some other YouTubers who talk about pop culture will call them, and when adult pretenders get go on TV and start giving you their opinions about things that are way outside their pay grade, people tend to listen, which is mind-boggling until you realize it's a sign of how bad the culture is. So, with that said, Harrison Butker is quickly becoming many Catholics' favorite Catholic public figure, their favorite Catholic celebrity. See, for one, he's actually relevant in the world of the popular culture since he's actually playing for a high profile football team that's actually good by all accounts, unlike many Catholic actors whose careers are frankly relegated to the Angel Studio circuit or even worse, the comedy circuit, like Catholic convert Rob Schneider, who, as soon as he opened his mouth about things going on in the world, guess what happened to his career? It went away. And he's actually a pretty great guy from all the interviews I've seen with him, but he doesn't get the traction like someone like Harrison Butker does. Plus, Butker is beloved because he fearlessly speaks his mind. He clearly doesn't care what happens to him if he speaks the truth of the faith, and he's willing to take the slings and arrows that come with speaking his mind. It's kind of weird, isn't it, though? You see, most celebrities inundate us with their political hot takes, but the hot takes are always applauded because they're always the same hot take. Basically, progressive orthodoxy good, what was considered for all normal for all of human history bad. That's the message pushed by most celebrities, and they're applauded for it. They're rewarded for a job well done for giving us the same boring hot take all the time. But not when it comes to Harrison Butker, though. And every time he says something, he gets pushback. Now, I personally don't think everything he said is worth talking about, on this channel at least. He had some things to say about the coming political contest in November that I'm sure you can already guess what he had to say, and that's fine. But weirdly, that didn't get as much pushback as his statement a few months ago given at a Catholic college to Catholic students graduating who were wanting to presumably go on to live Catholic lives. Now, I'm sure you probably don't need to refresh your memory on this, but I'm going to do it anyway just to make sure we're clear about everything when we bring these nuns into the story. So, to freshen your memory on this, here's what he said, except I'm going to use the slanderous reporting on this from the secular media to kind of drive the point home. So, we're going to turn to a website that I don't know if I've ever cited before here. We're going to go to Forbes, who gave us this headline: Benedictine College nuns blast Harrison Butker's controversial commencement speech. Controversial. Remember, the only reason it was controversial is because there was a camera rolling, recording it, and then it was made public. Otherwise, he was giving a Catholic speech that talked about Catholic things to a Catholic audience at a conservative Catholic school who were presumably after graduation wanting to go live reasonably Catholic lives. Context is important when determining if something is controversial or not. But again, some nuns got wind of this and made hay out of it. You see, the nuns in question here are pantsuit wearing, go out and make a mess of things, social justice nuns whose way of interacting with the world and their advocacy especially wouldn't be recognizable to St. Benedict or any of the great religious women saints of the Benedictine tradition. To put it mildly, what they do would not be recognizable to them. But here's the quick recap of his statement with the spin focusing on the nuns heroically in the eyes of the secular media pushing back against him. Just to give you a quick recap here from the other side. Quote, in an online statement, the nuns, rather than, quote, promoting in an online statement, the nuns say, rather than, quote, promoting unity in our church, our nation, and the world, his comments seem to have fostered division and did not represent, quote, the Catholic Benedictine liberal arts college that our founders envisioned. The nuns pointed specifically to Butker's divisive comments over women, where he suggested a woman's highest calling is to be a homemaker, arguing the women they teach have, quote, have made a tremendous difference in the world in their roles as wives and mothers and through their God given gifts in leadership, scholarship, and their careers. The nuns say they teach young men and women to, quote, make a gospel centered, compassionate home within themselves where they can welcome others as Christ, empowering them to be the best versions of themselves, end quote. Now, I don't even know what it means to make a, quote, gospel centered, compassionate home within yourself. I don't even know what that means because it sounds at least a little bit like turning inward, which we are commanded as Catholics through the constant teaching of the church, including by Pope Francis. He's never broken from this, to not turn inward. So it's like the one thing we all agree on is don't become self-centered. And this sounds at least a little bit like that. I might be wrong on that though. But the rest of it sounds nice. Just remember though, when political opportunities present themselves, modernists will try to sound both simultaneously Catholic and secular to score some rather cheap culture war points, which is what they were doing here. The article never shows you what the nuns look like, though. So I'm going to now show you a picture of the nuns just to make sure we're all on the same page about the order of religious we're talking about here. And I don't normally like to go after like appearances and things. I'm not one to talk when it comes to secular appearances, but note that this looks like a bridge club or maybe the local meeting of the homeowners association or maybe some sort of oversight group of your local library. All right. But it doesn't look like a group of nuns. And that's kind of important here because functionally speaking, they have betrayed the faith and they've done it using the tools of money, which is honestly just perfect for the story. And that shouldn't surprise anybody here because, again, when you see what we're talking about here, you get this headline from LifeSite, which kind of sums it up. So LifeSite News, who I will admit is not neutral, but no media outlet is neutral. It's just LifeSite is just upfront with their biases. Their headline is, and we got to be careful with this one for obvious reasons, progressive Benedictine nuns who criticize Harrison Butker and invest in companies to push liberal causes. The Sisters of Mount St. Scholastica invest in companies like Netflix to push them to embrace diversity and loony policies about care for our common home, as Pope Francis calls it. But the nuns largely ignore their support for the legal sacrifice of the most vulnerable to Satan, according to new report. Now, obviously, that is a spicy headline that you see on screen, and we have to play around with the words to keep this stream going on this platform. So we're just going to focus there on that picture, again, of the nuns so you have an idea of who we're talking about. But here's a brief excerpt from this. Quote, the Benedictine nuns who criticize Harrison Butker's viral anti-evil sacrifice, pro-matrimony speech are gaining media attention for investing in companies to push progressive policies. A report published in The Independent and the Associated Press described the investment activism, that's the key word here, that the Sisters of Mount St. Scholastica engage in. Quote, they invest what little they have in corporations that match their religious ideals, but also keep a bit in some that don't, so they can push those companies to change policies they view as harmful, the report says. End quote. Now let's zoom in on this. Match their religious ideals, but also some that don't, so that they can then get them to match their religious ideals. Match their religious ideals. I'm going to emphasize that for you because LifeSite puts this in the bluntest terms possible, and I'm just going to explain this to you in friendly ways to our platform here. So let's give you some examples from the article without quoting it. LifeSite tells us that they invest in Netflix, that they use their investment to write letters to the board as investors to call on Netflix to ensure diversity in its board of directors and to ensure progressive messaging in its programming. Another example given is that they invest in numerous manufacturers of, we'll call them medical products, specifically the companies that push the solution to the 2020 affliction that shut everything down for a year, basically. The nuns in that case aren't using their investment power to call the people behind it to repentance, or to at least to apologize for the grave evils they did that year and beyond. No, nothing like that. They're using their investment dollars to warn them to not to hike the price of their other products. That's fine by itself, but here's the thing. When you invest in a company knowingly, meaning you actively go out of your way to put money into that company by purchasing stocks, you are supporting the company's work. And I'm not saying, like, for instance, if you hand your money over to a financial advisor or a financial planner and let them invest it for you without asking too many questions, because most people don't ask with that stuff, right? Like if you watching this have a retirement account, most of you have never bothered to ask, I don't know who handles your account, but let's say Fidelity. They're one of the biggest names in the game. most of you have never bothered to ask how your money is invested in specific instances. And I know some of you in the comments are going to say that you gave explicit instructions to your financial planner. Good on you for that. I applaud you for having the foresight. Most people don't think about it, though. But that's not what we're talking about here. The nuns are actively, with full intent of the will, investing in, frankly, overtly evil companies to push them to promote what are often evil ends themselves. The medical product example notwithstanding. And the one question I have is, as you're going to see, they have a very big, we'll call it Laudato Si focus. Pope Francis's famous encyclical on care for our common home, where he where it was like the most blatant to that point time, where he pushed the secular line on issues of the day, now 10 years ago almost. Do you think they're doing this with, say, I don't know, Exxon? You think they're putting money into Exxon or companies like that? I really sincerely doubt it. Another example, though, is that they really have taken Laudato Si and Pope Francis' exhortation into heart. They have a green focus. They're dedicated to care for our common home, and they use their financial influence to try to push the companies to do what they want on that issue. Now, thankfully, for the rest of us, their resolutions don't always pan out for them, and that's definitely a good thing. But that's what these nuns are up to. When you think about the work of nuns, you think of prayer, fasting, and that kind of stuff, because regardless if they're cloistered or not, nuns typically pray the office. They're doing works to support their their property, their cloister or whatever, to keep up, because that's just basic church law stuff. But after that, you tend to think of, if they're not cloistered, they're probably out helping the poor, making sandwiches or doing something out there, right? That does not look like what these nuns are doing. They're engaging in activism. See, as you expect, they're accused of being aligned with the party of Moloch, who have promised to restore full access to their satanic ritual sacrifice to all Americans through federal action if they win the coming contest this fall. The response of the nuns is rather telling, by the way, to that, because they acknowledge that people have said that about them. So here's what they say, quote, "But with so many Catholic groups leading the anti-satanic offering movement, they find other causes to champion," or their own internal report said. The liberal sisters' approach stands in stark contrast to that of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who, despite her work being focused on helping the poor, was a champion for the cause of those affected by that, or were the target of that satanic offering, and famously said that the methods for it are, quote, "the greatest destroyer of peace today." Say what you want about Mother Teresa. She's not wrong there. In his viral commencement speech at Benedictine College in Kansas, Harrison Butker said to the women present, quote, "Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. I can tell you that my beautiful wife Isabel would be the first to say her life truly started when she started living her vocation as a wife and as a mother." He warned about the diabolical lies the world tells them about having a low view of that vocation. The Sisters of Mount St. Scholastica took offense to that and other parts of Butker's speech, saying that, quote, "instead of promoting unity in our church, our nation, and the world, Butker's comments, quote, seem to have fostered division. We want to be known as an inclusive, welcoming community," they said in a statement, end quote. So, put in the context of there being activists who push big corporations to push for the values change they want to see in the world, which they frame as religious views, by the way. I don't know what religion they're talking about, but they frame this as religious views of theirs. What do you think of their statements about Harrison Butker now? Knowing what they do behind the scenes, and that they frame this stuff, this call for Netflix to keep doing what Netflix does and make it worse, basically. And they call that as part of the religious convictions. What do you think about their critique of Harrison Butker now? Let me know in the live chat or in the comments if you're watching this later. It probably doesn't change anyone's real minds about them or his statement, which is to be expected. But let's place those statements and everything else they've said here in some rather important context, because in the church right now is a debate going on about the ordination of women to the diaconate, priesthood, the rest of it. Pope Francis, back in May, famously told a 60 Minutes interviewer that there will be no ordained deaconesses. And the key word there is ordained. As much as I said as much as the time, as did many other Catholic commentators. that the key word there is ordained. He didn't close the door on the deaconesses issue. He closed the door on the ordination issue. Proponents of deaconesses have picked up this talking point change, by the way, as well. And they are now saying some really truly absurd things publicly, like this here. Headline from the National Catholic Reporter, because where else? If women cannot be deacons, we should stop ordaining men deacons. Now, that's a little weird, isn't it? The article is written by Pastor Tommy Reese of the Jesuit Church. He's basically like a Dollar General or Great Value brand James Martin. He pushes all the same errors. It's just that, quite frankly, James Martin is much more charismatic and much more talented, it seems, than Pastor Tommy Reese. Though Tommy Reese is a good writer, better writer than I am. I will give him that. But note how Reese frames this. He's a believer in papal relativism, saying that despite Pope Francis saying no to it, we're going to get this in the future under a future pope. And as you'll see in my Malachi Martin video today, which if you're watching this live as I'm broadcasting this in the 4 o'clock hour Central Time, less than an hour from now, please, I'd highly recommend tuning into that. The Jesuits are trying to destroy papal authority. Here's your proof from Pastor Tommy Reese. Quote, Pope Francis has made it perfectly clear that he's opposed to ordaining women as deacons. Although I disagree with him, I accept that we are not going to see women deacons during his pontificate. Interesting qualification there. But if Francis or anyone else opposes ordaining women deacons, there is a simple solution. Stop ordaining anyone as deacons and let both women and men serve many of the same functions as catechists. The topic of women deacons has caused a good deal of controversy of late. Francis raised hopes that women might be ordained deacons in 2016 when he created a commission to examine the history of women deacons. This was in response to a request from the International Union of Superiors General, which represents some 600,000 religious women around the world. A second commission to study the possibility of women deacons was formed in 2020. Sadly, the reports of these commissions were never made public. End quote. There are attacks against papal authority in that short statement, specifically that the Pope hasn't closed the door on the ordination of women. Now, we've seen that before. Pastor Tommy Reese is just part of the same coterie of people telling people that John Paul II didn't close the door on the subject 30 years ago either. Even though there is a debate about whether he invoked papal infallibility on his closing on that question. And these are the same folks who say that the church has gotten this wrong since the beginning, and that the church has been doing a grave injustice to women on the score for 2,000 years. Even worse, they're saying that Jesus got it wrong when he chose men to be the recipients of holy orders, because they categorically reject the teaching of the church on this, even if they say they don't when they push for this. But you've heard all that before. But now Pastor Tommy Reese of the Jesuit Church says that the Catholic Church has gotten this wrong this entire time. His argument, if women can't be ordained to the diaconate, men should not be ordained either. Why? Because most of what deacons do is a matter of canon law, so don't ordain either men or women, so that women can become deaconettes and preach from the ambo. That's what this is about. Authority. Because teaching is a matter of authority. It's what it's always about. This is why whenever I bring up any kind of teaching document, I always refer to saints and doctors of the church and past popes and past councils and things, because they have authority. But the most basic authority that you as a Catholic are going to run into in your lives of faith is going to be when you go to Mass on Sunday and the priest or his deacon go and teach from the ambo during the liturgy of the word. Here's what Pastor Tommy has to say, quote, those who advocate women deacons point out that only the ordained, whether deacons or priests, can give homilies at Mass or preside over weddings. Catechists can do neither, and expanding their role would neither give women a greater role in the church nor expand the number of people who can minister to the faithful. But in the case of giving homilies, this is simply canon law and can be changed, and lay people can be delegated in many circumstances to preside at a wedding. The ministers of the sacrament of marriage are the couple, not the priest or deacon, who only witness the marriage for the church. Similarly, lay people may preside at funerals without a mass, and any lay person, even a non-Catholic, can baptize. In truth, there is nothing a deacon can do that a lay person cannot do. I am not saying that many male deacons do not do wonderful work for the church. I am simply saying that they could do the same work without ordination. Limiting the diaconate and priesthood to men is painful for many women in the church. But if we cannot ordain women as deacons, there's no reason we have to ordain men. If the point of ordination is simply to give the deacon more status, this is another form of clericalism. End quote. If the point is to give them more status, I am about as sick of the term clericalism as anybody you're ever going to meet. But that's a brazen attack on the church. To say that this practice of ordaining deacons, which goes back to antiquity, call that clericalism. To even imply that there might be clericalism, that's wicked. That's absolutely wicked. But his argument can be summed up as this: won't someone think about their feelings? That's his argument. The nuns who rebuked Harrison Butker made a similar argument, if you'll recall. They said that his statements were divisive and hurt people's feelings. The only feelings hurt were by secularists who weren't even the target audience for his address. I'm going to remind you, the people in Harrison Butker's audience were conservative Catholics at a conservative Catholic college who were graduating from that conservative Catholic college, who are probably going to go on and live reasonably Catholic lives. At least that's their intent. At worst, they heard something they'd heard many times before. The only reason we know about his address at all is because somebody filmed it and put it online, and then the media decided to tell the world about it in order to score some cheap political points and their great political divide in the country. But we live under the rule of feelings, both in the church and outside the church. We're expected to submit to the feelings and whims of people who barely can control their own emotions, and we're expected to include the feelings of others on matters of doctrine and practice of the faith. We're supposed to submit our minds and our hearts, which also include our feelings, to the church's authority. That's what we're supposed to do. The constant teachings of the church. To paraphrase someone I don't care much for, facts don't care about your feelings. And in this case, the teachings of the faith are the facts of life. And they don't really care much about your feelings. Maybe you should elevate your mind and your heart through prayer and fasting and the rest of it to conform your feelings to the wisdom of the church. Going down the road of this relativism that they're advocating for leads to only one place, and that's destruction, the loss of souls. You know how this works. The church has spilled a lot of ink talking about this over the centuries. Curious what people have to say about this in the comments before I wrap this up. Philip says, I would love to see the restoration of all the minor orders, give young men models to aspire to in service of the church. It is about service, not status. There is a lot of talk, even for outside of traditional circles, that the suppression of the minor orders after Vatican II, of the ordained minor orders, was a terrible thing and had wrought a heavy cost on the church. And I would love to see them back as well. Because there used to be not just be deacons and priests, there used to be subdeacons and porters and the rest of it. Now most of those are just volunteer positions in your parish. It would be nice to have these kinds of things taken with much more gravity than they are now. Joe Blog says women transmit the values and culture. Men love the woman and support her. He cares for her as Jesus cares for the church. Children are more supportive than ever with these anti-Christian debates. I mean, people don't. That's one of the things that no one ever thinks about is essentially the future. What happens? What is the impact on the family dynamic by just changing all these things? People don't understand that there is a definite link between like the state of families and the state of the church, at least for Catholics. All right. Let's take a look finally. Anything else in the chat here? Oh, let's take a look. Father Reese is talking nonsense. Yeah. M says a convent in Belgium recently shut down due to the lack of new members. Errors aside, I don't think having ordination of women would increase vocations. I think you're probably right about that. People are missing all of this. It's the same thing with viri probati, the idea of let's ordain married men, especially older married men, which is then opens the door to just a married priesthood in the West. And it's not going to help vocations. There's no way it's going to help vocations, not in any meaningful sense. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. I hope that y'all have yourselves a wonderful day and maybe just don't get too wrapped up in a lot of the political discussions going on out in the outside world today, because I don't think they're very helpful. But as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.